All right, so this is just an example using the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, and specifically we're just going to look at how we connect to modules, functions, add in layers, generate a map, and then set some extents. Okay, so first off, to use this API, you're going to have to reference it. So you can either download it, store it locally, or reference the CDN. So here we are referencing it using the Esri web page. So in the head here we have a link that links to the CSS associated with the API, and then we have a link to the JavaScript API. So that should allow us to use those functions. So that occurs in the head, and then I have a style argument here in the head, which is CSS, and is being used to set up the div basically that holds the map. And in this case, the website is really just the map, so there's no other information there. In this code, this section here in the body is the only thing that actually is drawing on the page. So I've created a div and I've provided an ID, and we call that ID when we set up the map, so it draws in the div, which is effectively the entire viewport. So it's basically filling the full height and width of the viewport, and there's no margin, no padding. Okay, and then we get into this script tag, which sets up and defines the map. Okay, so first off, within require, you have to call the functions, the modules that you need to work with. So we have to call map, which allows us to create a map object, a map view, which allows us to create a map view from the map, and then I also pulled in the feature layer module because we're going to read in some feature layers. Okay, and that's all defined in this JavaScript array. And then we have a function, anonymous function, and then there we have to call the functions that we're going to use. Note they have to be in the same order as that the modules are called in. So map, view, and then feature layer. If you change the order and they don't match up, it's not going to work. Okay, and then inside of this function, then we actually build the map out. So we create a variable called map, use the new keyword there, which is generally used when you're creating a variable from a class, right? So we're using this map object, and all we're doing is defining a base map. So the hybrid base map is basically satellite aerial photography with some annotations and ancillary data. So that would create the map. Then we're going to add it to a view. So this container is set to view div. So that means it's going to draw inside of this div, which is effectively the full map view, or viewport, I mean. And then the map that's going to be drawn in that view is the map object, which we already created. And then we set a center. So the first number here is the longitude, and the second is the latitude. So west, negative, and then north, positive. And then a zoom level. Okay, so the next set of code is just pulling in some layers and adding them to the map. So I'm actually getting these data layers from my ArcGIS Online account. So there's two different layers there. They're coming from our ArcGIS Online account. The first one is this base image, which is mean annual temperature. And then the second one are these point features that are basically proportional symbols for percent forest cover. So those are called in with the feature layer function. And then we add into the map with the .add function. And note we have feature layer and feature layer 2. And then that renders out and then renders into the viewport, and we have a map like this. Note that I didn't define any symbology for these, and that's because I'm using the default symbology that's set up for the feature layer on ArcGIS Online. Later on, we'll look at some options for changing the symbology if you don't want to use the default or nothing is defined. But here I'm not needing to change it because I'm just using the default. There's also no pop-ups or anything, so nothing's been configured with that, so it's pretty simple. Okay, so let's try to do a couple things just to break it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to swap the order of these two things. So I'm going to remove this. So save, and now it's broke. And that's because, again, these have to be in the same order. So if I fix that, there we go. If I fix this, then that should draw back in. Okay, so again, the modules and these functions have to be called in the same order. If we didn't set any of this up, the feature layers, then we would basically just get a base map. So I'm going to comment that out. Oops. There we go. And we'll have to call it to here. And okay, so let's do a file, save. And now we just have the base map, and that's because we're not calling in these two feature layers. Note there's multiple ways you can add layers to a map. For example, you can add the layers in when you create the map. Here I'm doing it after the fact. All right, let me do a save, hopefully get back the original. There we go. So that's a quick little demonstration on how to create a map, define its extent, put it into a view, and then draw in some layers. That's pretty basic.